Jesus says that the sheep hear my voice, and they listen, and they follow me. The habit of listening to my voice, and I know them by experience. The habit of listening to my voice. So it's not just a one-time, I heard you once. It's continual listening, day in and day out. And experience. How do we get to know anybody really? It's just by experience, being with them, in contact with them one way or another. The more we share and back and forth, the more you get to know each other. And so Jesus is telling these Jews, you basically don't want that from me. You're looking to string me up, and you're missing out. My sheep will always be listening to me. And we find that Peter, who we find as one of the first disciples, was the one who spoke before he thought, put his foot in his mouth more often than not, and got it wrong a lot of times. But even Peter, in this section of Acts with the woman Dorcas, who's now passed away, and Peter, like Jesus, gets everybody out of the room, and then he kneels down and prays. And then he asks for her to please rise. Now the prayer is the thing that he never did before, and you remember in the Gospels, people come back to Jesus and say, yeah, your disciples couldn't heal these people. They tried and they just couldn't. And Jesus was frustrated and said, these can only be healed by prayer. And you have to believe that Peter was one who was in the habit of listening. He may not have got it right the first time, but eventually he understood. And that's what Jesus is telling the Jews. With time, you will come to know who I am. As a matter of fact, you say, just tell us plainly who you are. Well, Jesus, remember the well with the Samaritan woman who came up to him and asked who he was? And she said, well, there's this Messiah, and I've heard about him. And Jesus said, well, I'm he. I'm the one that they're talking about. I'm the Messiah. And then a little later, Peter makes the claim that you are the Holy One of God. And then just a few passages before, the blind man on the side of the road, and Jesus says, have you heard about the Messiah? Have you heard about the one who's to come? And the man said, yes. And Jesus says, it's me. You're talking to him. And now you're seeing who it is. And the Jews still have a tough time. Well, the Gospel of John is often called the signs gospel. Signs of Jesus as who he was. The Son of God, the Son of Man. One sign after another. I need another sign. Just one more sign and I'll believe. Just one more and then I'll believe. Well, what will it take? And Jesus says, you've had enough time. You understand. You have a different agenda. Your minds are closed right now. Maybe with time, who knows? But you're missing out on something very, very wonderful. And and then you wonder if he was done with them or not. I tend to think that God continues to pursue and continues to go after people. You remember the lost sheep, right? The 99 are safe, the one is lost, and he says, well, the shepherd will put the 99 in safekeeping, with his hired hands or whatever, and then he'll go after the lost sheep. I suspect the Jews at this point are the lost sheep that Jesus is trying to, in some ways, to get them to understand, to come into the sheepfold. And as you read this passage, the identity of Jesus is Son of God and also man. It's kind of fluid. It's kind of confusing at times. Because as you read this, Jesus was saying, the works that I do in my Father's name testify to me. The works I do in my Father's name. So you wonder, Jesus is a sheep as well. Jesus is doing God's will. Take this cup from me. But if it's your will, so be it. I'll go through with it. I'll go on the cross. I'll go through the death, and I'll go through the resurrection. So Jesus was the one who listened to God as well. And yet, he's also, you go on for centuries trying to figure out the man, the God, the whole piece. But what I take through is Jesus was one of us. I think he struggled, and I think he was also attentive to God's needs, and he wasn't, it's not about him so much, it's about God. I obey my Father too. I listened actively to my Father as well. And as a matter of fact, those who are in my camp, in God's camp, once God has you, once you're there, God will hold you and not let you go, no matter what. And even if Jesus was getting berated, even though he was getting betrayed, even though he was going through all the trials, he never let go of his disciples. He never let go of the people that were willing to listen and follow. He was focused on his mission, God's mission for him in this life. I think about an example of this, just holding on and not letting go for the good of us. A year ago, Julie, as council president, and I were invited to a synod event. It was celebrating churches and roster leaders who had special anniversaries. 25 years as a pastor, or 50 years ordained, or 60 years ordained, what have you. Churches, 50, 75 years old, 100, whatever. But 175, we were one of two. I think St. Olaf was a month before we were, so we're second place, whatever. But and they're Norwegians, anyway. So, anyway, there was an older gentleman. He had to be celebrating his 50th, at least, maybe even 60th year of ordination. He's about this big. He maybe weighed $135, $140, 140 pounds, maybe. And he was saying he remembers a time when he was a chaplain at a prison. I had to see that to believe it. But he said there was an instance where this was big inmate. And he was in the room with his inmate, and his inmate started getting rowdy. The guards were kind of antagonizing him a bit. And so he was charging at the window, and he was going to jump. He had had enough. He was suicidal. He was going to jump out that window. And this chaplain grabs him by the belt, and you can see him sliding, and this guy's wanting to jump out the window. And he said, "No, don't, please don't." And the inmate stops, and they finally get him under control. The inmate, and 2 weeks later, the chaplain and the inmate are in a room together, and the chaplain says, "By the way, 2 weeks ago, I don't understand. You're ready to jump out the window, and I was holding you, but I'm nothing. If you really wanted to jump out the window, I was not in your way. You would have taken me with you. Why did you stop?" And the inmate said, "You know what? In my whole life, you were the only one who ever cried for me. You were the only one who would have held me by my belt to prevent me from doing something that was life-threatening. You were the only one who cared. You never let go." And I think, wow. Jesus is saying, I'm never going to let you go. I cry for you. I hurt for you. I take your pain. I try to help you ease your pain. I try to follow you. I try to be with you whenever you're hurt, or whenever you're confused, or even when you're joyful and happy. I'm with you, and I'm holding on to your belts, per se, and I won't let go, ever. And we have to look at that and say, God cares. God cares for each and every one of us in a special kind of way. That's what a shepherd does for the sheep. Praise be to God. Amen.